All right, my English teacher friends. So I come to you with yet another writing workshop in which we're going to feature FRQ1 from the 2022 AP Language and Composition exam, which focused on STEM research. And we'll look at that prompt in just a second here. But the big thing that I want to do in this video is show you my button trick. And I sincerely think that this is the best way ever to teach line of reasoning. So one of the main goals for students is to stay really cogent within their body paragraphs from start to finish. And we as composition teachers know that things can get waylaid pretty quickly, right? Things can go a little wayward within student writing if they don't sustain a real tight line of reasoning. So I have a template among all templates to show you today that will really nicely elucidate how students can stay super locked in, super logical in their logical progressions in their body paragraphs. But I'm going to stick to status quo because we have to look at the introductions because that's the anchor. We have to look at the thesis statements. So I'll show you 4 introductions in which students either use the declarative or inverted template model that I use, that triangulated approach that you might be familiar with. And then we'll tackle body paragraphs syllogistically. And when we get to the body paragraphs, I will show you the button trick. So just as another aside, I did FRQ 2 2022 AP Literature and Composition, the infamous octopus piece for my AP Literature friends. So if you teach AP Lit and want to look at the button trick for an FRQ 2 for the Lit exam, then go check that out. That's in my YouTube channel. So without further ado, I always got to say this. I'm that guy that's peddling this question around all the ELA circuits. What if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? I think it's a very serious question in the sense that we need to differentiate the difference between assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of it. So when I show you these templates, I really encourage teachers to position themselves as the expert writer in the classroom and get right to the easel, get right to the proverbial canvas and paint with your students. And here's the kicker about Bob Ross that not too many people know. He used something called the wet on wet technique, which in painting is known as a heuristic. In composition, we tend to call heuristics templates. So his wet on wet technique, he used every single episode of The Joy of Painting. Whenever he was doing a natural landscape, he employed the wet on wet technique. My students, no matter the expository mode, whether it be synthesis, argument, persuasion, research, rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, they either declare or invert for the introductory paragraph, and then they do their body paragraph syllogistically. So 3 templates is all you need to write across the expository modes, and these work not just for FRQ1 on the AP language exam, but for the rhetorical analysis and the argument as well. So here's the prompt for this STEM piece. Since the early 2000s, the United States government and a number of corporations have sponsored initiatives to improve education in the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The emphasis on STEM subjects in elementary, secondary, and higher education reflects concerns that United States students are less proficient in these areas than are students in other countries. Additionally, there is a belief that mastery in STEM fields is now essential in order to join a highly technical and specialized workforce. However, not everyone is convinced that a STEM-focused curriculum is necessary and or effective. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of initiatives to improve STEM education and increase the number of students interested in the STEM disciplines. So it's kind of a mouthy prompt. There's quite a bit there, but it's pretty straightforward, right? So not much to really unpack with that. So let's ask this question. How do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, those that are familiar with my work, I tacitly say declare or invert. So here are a couple of caveats. For rhetorical analysis, I tell my students always declare. For literary analysis, I say always invert. But for synthesis, argument, persuasion, research, it's a 50-50 coin flip that ultimately is contingent upon two things: the language in the prompt, and then the strategy, sort of like the rhetorical strategy, the nuance of the argument that the student wants to take out of the gate. Largely dictates whether or not they're going to declare or invert. So let's unpack what I mean by declare. When you declare, you're going to come out and make some statement about STEM education right out of the gate. Just boom, drop the thesis in the first sentence. From there, you're going to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background. And I really want to emphasize this. Under no circumstances whatsoever is a student supposed to be in the source material in the introductory paragraph. The directions are clear. Your argument must be central. So no sources in here, no paraphrasing, no regurgitation of any sources whatsoever. 100% purely the student's argument. So some context, background, and then tier 2 and sentence constructs I got to define a little bit. So in my courses, whether I'm teaching students or teaching teachers through my National Writing Project professional development offerings, I do intensive word study academies. I know in my 21 years of teaching that students come to me with kind of a vocabulary void. There's a big chasm in their breadth of word knowledge. So one thing I do is some deep concentrated word study. And by tier 2, I simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. This is an academic response, so I expect to see some academic diction in it. But here's the kicker, right? You can't totally geek out and be all pedantic and contrived with your voice. Otherwise, it's not going to sound natural and you're going to preclude yourself from getting the sophistication point. The idea is that it's not, the idea of using $1 million word is not the equivalent of good writing. And sometimes we need to disabuse students of that. So I like to see a nice teeter-totter balance between the tier 2, a little bit of colloquial and a little bit of vernacular. I think bodes well for the sophistication point. Sentence constructs. I'm a pupil of Strunk and White and their seminal text called Write It Right. They have something in there called Rule Number 18 that espouses the idea that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So you'll see my students try to achieve voice rhythm and flow by manipulating their syntactical maneuvers. And oftentimes, young, emerging, struggling writers use 3 sentence constructs: the short, simple declarative, independent clause, and sometimes you might see an adverb or an adjective clause. And they pretty much alternate between those 3 so that when you read it, you have a da-da, 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 da-da kind of rhythm flow to it. My students are going to try to make some music with their sentence constructs. I think that's key to sophistication. And I go over that extensively in my Nuance Academy with my students and with my National Writing Project participants. And then with my template, introductory paragraphs are always 4 sentences long. No more, no less, 4 sentences. We can take the declarative and flip it on its head. And in this case, we end with the thesis. We're going to say something about STEM education in that last sentence. So we might begin with a hook, an analogy, begin with the context, background, parcel in those tier 2s, focus on those sentence constructs for voice rhythm and flow, and exactly 4 sentences. So it doesn't really matter. So let's see what student number 1 is doing and what they have up their sleeve here. Again, note the tier 2, note the sentence constructs. Thesis is going to come first, or thesis is going to come last. Let's read this one. Since its inception, STEM initiatives have crossed the desk of 5 U.S. presidents. That doesn't sound like a thesis. This sounds like context and background. So hopefully in this last sentence, we're going to be hit with a thesis statement. In other words, these measures have had nearly 2 decades and countless taxpayer dollars to take root and advance profound change. But the reality is this: nothing has really changed. Given that American students are still leagues behind their international counterparts in the STEM disciplines, a continuance in funding such programs lacks common sense. And that sounds like a really strong thesis statement right there. So this is quintessential inversion, right? And I like what this student has done here. The vocab is high in many instances, but it's not over the top. But I like this teeter-totter swing back to lacks common sense. Like when you do that with words like initiative and inception, right? It really bodes well sometimes just to throw a little colloquial vernacular in there. I think that's really fundamental to being in consideration for the sophistication merit badge. So this one out of the gate is blazing. It's really, really good. 4 sentences. Look at the sentence structures. I like this third sentence with the use of the dash, and then followed up by this long sentence right here. Really like how this student tackled that. Student number 2 going to do the exact same thing. The American educational system needs to make a decision as to whether or not it is producing a national workforce that are soulless automatons or a nation of well-rounded independent thinkers. So they're starting with the context and background. So immediately I know that this is going to be inverted. STEM in and of itself is inadequate. To be a fully functioning member of society, one needs direct and specific training in other things such as the arts, soft skills, and basic common sense, things that curriculums often overlook. Here's the thesis right here. For STEM to make a significant social impact, other disciplines will need to be included. So basically add more letters to the alphabet here, maybe some A for arts or soft skills. Even SEL or something of that nature. We'll have to see where the student's going in their body paragraphs. But this one likewise is inverted. And as we practice this essay, I found that most of my students did go the inverted route for this. They just felt the need to give a little bit of context and background before clobbering the reader over the head with a thesis statement. Student 3, going to follow the exact same template. They're either going to declare or invert 4 sentences, tier 2 sentence constructs. The acronym of STEM is missing some crucial letters from the alphabet. First, in order to create a world-class workforce, one needs to include the letters LAE, liberal arts education. Second, given that the whole student must be educated, the letters SEL must also be added, social emotional learning. Initiatives to improve STEM are needed, but they need to be done sensibly and with the best intentions of the nation and an individual in mind. So you have another inverted here. What I really like about this one is it's clear in the directions. Your argument must be central. This is an authentic thesis statement that none of the source materials articulate. I tell my students, if you piggyback verbatim one of the theses that is espoused in the 6 sources, it's not going to bode well for you. You really got to say something authentic and off the mark a little bit. And I think that all 3 of these students have done that so far. Your argument must be central. So I often tell my students, the sources might, take it to a certain level, and then you come to a fork in the road and you're going to take it in a different, better, more advanced direction with your own spin on it. Student 4 going to do the exact same thing. To be a world leader, there needs to be greater focus on STEM education. So this one sounds more like a declarative. Clearly, the American educational system is lagging in many areas, but neglecting to shore up its most vital workforce would be a costly error both politically and economically. What the world needs right now is specialization, not loosey-goosey training in disciplines that hold no pragmatic value. The world is in peril right now, and STEM initiatives are clearly a perfect panacea. So very good thesis. I think they tried to declare it, but in the end, the thesis really is hammered home here. So great vocab, great sentence constructs, very clearly worded. I think all 4 students, any AP reader would say, wow, if this kid can continue this throughout the duration of this paper, they're getting the sophistication point. And that's all it is. Declare or invert. Focus on those sentence constructs. Really focus on that tier 2 without overdoing it. And every single time, It works like magic. So we got to talk about that button trick right now and get into the body paragraphs. So we got to ask ourselves that question: how do I write the body paragraphs? And my tacit response to that always, always, always is proceed syllogistically. So I know some of you are new to me, so I'm going to need to do a little cursory drive through the syllogistic method. And then for those that are new to me, know that in my YouTube channel, you can do a deep dive into how I teach inductive, deductive reasoning and take a deeper look at the syllogistic method in terms of its history, its origin, and its implications for writing instruction. So I'm just going to be brief on this. The syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. It comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich town boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, word wrangling, wordsmithing. And they would often throw out juicy, essential questions, just like this one, just like STEM education. But, within the tradition, they might throw out something like this: what is justice? And those that are familiar with the canon know, hey, that's the question. That's the essential question for Plato's Republic. So these great philosophical scholars and think tankers would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle noted, hey, some of my really good orators, they're very mathematical. They're very computative in their logic, in their logical progression. They are thinking syllogistically, kind of like a mathematical formula. And here's what all a syllogism is. It's logos. Premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. When we argue like this and keep it all tied together, we achieve something that Aristotle coined: cogency. The idea that you're bulletproof in terms of your logic. So if I were to say premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. You all would nod your head and say, Christian, that's sad. Sorry for your dog, but that is cogent, my friend. That makes perfect, utmost sense. Here's the kicker with synthesis in particular. Most of our students, and I want to do a webinar on this real soon, most College Board sample papers that I see, kids focus way too much on the second premise. And that's why synthesis reads like a Cliff Note summation and not an act of argumentation, right? You got to use the sources to argue, and kids really struggle to do that. Too much focus on the second premise. So how do we tweak that into a template for the purposes of writing a synthesis paper? Here's the kicker. First premise: an argument containing a why reason. Up top in the thesis, we do not state why. We just take a side, right? That's it. We take a side. We make our stance and we articulate it. In the first premise, we're going to get into the why reason. Now, in terms of training wheels, in terms of scaffolds, I always ask my students to take 3 sentences to articulate the first premise. It keeps the centrality of the argument. The sooner up top in the body paragraph that you begin to paraphrase or cite your sources, you lose the centrality of the argument. So I think holding out for 3 sentences is really wise tactically, because it allows the reader to know that, hey, this kid's keeping the centrality of their argument. Second premise, we know we got to incorporate 3 sources. So it's our textual support. We're going to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. We don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. And then the conclusion of the body paragraph. And I really want to be clear as I articulate this. The conclusion of the body paragraph. You need to conclude body paragraphs just as you need to conclude essays, is the textual analysis. And this is where you throw your links back to the prompt and your links back to the thesis. All of this takes about 10 to 12 sentences. That's what my template calls for, 10 to 12 sentences for a syllogistic body paragraph. So let's take a look at the button trick, but let's also take a look at what the first premise should achieve. So just to recap this, we got to make an argument containing a why reason, and it's going to be 3 sentences long. There's a little hack, there's a little cheat to this. When my students say reason or reason why, it guarantees that they're going to articulate a reason why. So look at what this student does here, and then I'll explain the buttons that I put on this sample here. So note, it's 3 sentences long. We're still going to focus on the tier 2 and the sentence constructs, but look at the why reason. One reason why STEM initiatives have faltered is because they have not dangled the proverbial carrot in front of students' noses. In order for these measures to really recognize their full potential, there must be incentives like free college tuition and job placement guarantees. Otherwise, people will not buy in, as is evidenced over the last 20 years. So the button trick works like this. First premise is a promise, right? And the button trick plays upon that game, button, 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 who's got the button. You're dropping promises in the first premise. And in terms of keeping the promise of this first premise, we must have sources that are germane to this idea of carrot dangling, of initiatives, incentives, incentivizing the stems. So our quotes and paraphrases have to be about incentives. And then our quotes and paraphrases also has to be tied to the body of evidence over the last 20 years, all that research. So red is going to be the incentives, and green is going to be the body of evidence over the last 20 years. We made 2 promises here. So as we move into the second premise, which is the 4th sentence, we need to have red buttons and we need to have green buttons to stay cogent, to keep the line of reasoning intact. So let's take a look at another one here. This is a sample first premise, 3 sentences long, why reason. If STEM-focused curriculum does not inherit a few more vowels and consonants, there's no reason why institutions should continue to pursue it as an initiative. Standing alone, the acronym clearly does not meet the diverse needs of the total student. 20 years of evidence supports this fact. So what must we quote and or paraphrase to keep the promise of the first premise? We have a blue button here. And it's the idea that STEM doesn't have enough vowels and consonants. It's not focused enough. We need to add things to it. So what we quote and paraphrase needs to be the addition of more vowels and consonants. And just like the first one we looked at, we have to get into the research, the 20 years of research to prove this. Now, this is definitely a centralized argument. It's definitely an authentic argument. Both of these are. Both of the, both first premises that we've looked at are centralized arguments, and they're very good. So all you need to do is articulate the why reason. So where do we go from here? Second premise begins 4th sentence, and you're going to need blue button quotes and or paraphrases and green button quotes and paraphrases. If you bring in any other buttons, like if you start talking about, paper airplanes or, the everlasting gobstopper or something of that nature, you're going to have a logical fallacy. You can't bring anything else into the frame. You can only do blue buttons and green buttons. So 4th sentence, I tell my students immediately get into the sources, either quote and or paraphrase. So let's see what happens here. Gary May concurs in that he would like to see an A added to STEM, with the A standing for arts, source F. Ironically, policymakers on the opposing side of the argument quickly forget the fact that their liberal arts education played a huge role in their successes. I could also throw a green in here because we're starting to look at the evidence, right? While the likes of Marco Rubio are bluntly calling for more welder and fewer philosophers, he as well as others neglect to see that the undergraduate able to cobble together a course schedule integrating STEM and the humanities may be able to reap rich rewards, source C. So you're also seeing something here that's pretty cool. It's a template within the template. My kids, typically my better writers, are silky smooth with their quote transitions. And if they use a minimum of 5 words, so I'll say that again, a minimum of 5 words before the quote and keep the quote small, it should sound conversational, bracket as needed. I do have to teach bracketing extensively, and you'll see that in some forthcoming quotes here. So you quote you got to analyze. You don't want to overquote and you don't want to over paraphrase, right? Teeter-totter balance those guys out. So let's keep going here. The rewards derived from the A and account for statements like the following from our nation's elite. MIT biology prepared me for medicine. Literature prepared me to be a doctor. Source E. Now, I've seen in a lot of the AP groups, teachers ask how many quotes should go into a body paragraph. I've seen some of the pundits say 2. I tell my guys to go 3. I really like it when the sources can talk to each other. I like to see 3 sources in each body paragraph, and they need to be shaking hands with each other and kind of chit-chatting back to each other. So we quoted, let's analyze. Education in absence of the A breeds a workforce and a collective individual highly incapable of original thought and creativity. Clearly, medical knowledge is requisite, but so is the ability to interpret a patient's account and story, a skill hard to foster and grow without adequate exposure to the A. One thing the diehard STEM pundits overlook is the human touch, an implicit work skill that needs to be taught. 76% of prospective employees value ethical judgment and integrity, and 63% place a strong value on soft skills, source D. Now let's go back here. You see these blue buttons here and the green button? All those quotes and paraphrases are germane and linked. They're relevant to the promise of our first premise here, right? But now we got to wrap it up. This is plenty of textual support and textual analysis. You just can't end on a quote. You got to wrap it up. And usually my conclusions take about 2 sentences, and I chuck it all back to the prompt and all back to the thesis. So look at the conclusion here. And again, this is the conclusion of the body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay. Here's the thing. These skills are not congenital. They are developed and honed when curriculums include a healthy dose of the arts and humanities. As such, STEM initiatives must STEM initiatives must have a critical vowel. They missed a word there. As such, STEM initiatives must include a critical vowel. All right, we'll fix that up there. So sorry for stumbling on that one. But you can see here, that's how the button trick works. Like, that's super cogent. That is amazingly locked in from start to finish there. Very well done by that student. And again, you got to focus on, the tier 2 and the sentence constructs from start to finish. You get that voice rhythm flow going, that sophistication point is gonna come. Now, here's the question. What do I do next? My students for all FRQs, whether it be the Lang exam or the Lit exam, write 4-paragraph essays, intro to body, conclusion. So all my student would do for that next body paragraph is reload with a different why reason, get some new quotes, paraphrases, or wrap it around 10, 12 sentences. And that's it. And then we throw a conclusion paragraph on the end of it. So that is, in brief, my button trick. I hope you liked it. If you would like to work further with me, know that I have a bunch of professional development offerings through the National Writing Project. And this coming January 29th, I'm going to launch my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. Here's what it is in brief. We are going to do a deep dive into all things Nuance Academy, Word Study Academy. We're going to take a look at all the templates across the expository mode. We're going to dive into my 40 alternatives to traditional grading, my Plato's Plato discussion modality. We are going to do it all. So Sunday nights from 7 Eastern Standard Time to 8 p.m. we are going to meet for 5 consecutive weeks beginning January 29th, and we follow it up by Q&A. So here's the cool thing. National Writing Project endorses this, and they are giving a completion badge of 10 hours for a 5-hour course. It's a pretty sweet deal. So I know some teachers say, I can't commit to 5 hours. That's too much. I don't have it. Also note that there's a self-paced course as well that you can take, at your own accord, at your own pacing, which is pretty cool. National Writing Project and I also do free webinar series. We do one a month. That's our cadence going forward. And so there's some free stuff and there's some stuff that has a small price tag to it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I have a website where you can get information on all my PD offerings, and also there's a store where you can buy slides and writing workshop videos and things of that nature. teachinghowtowrite.com. So teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. teachinghowtowrite.com is my website. Hope all is well. Happy teaching and happy writing.